the shadows, bound for the gallows, a dead man walking, till love came calling. Rise up, rise up, rise up, rise up. 6 feet under, I thought it was over, and answered a prayer, the voice of a savior. Rise up, rise up, rise up, rise up. All at once I came alive, this beating heart, these open eyes, the grave let go, the darkness should have known. You're still rolling stone, you're still rolling stone.
Welcome everybody to our online virtual church service at Paris Presbyterian Church. So glad you're with us this morning. And just wanted, before we get into the rest of the service, wanted to bring you up to date on a couple of things, just make you aware of a few things. First of all, many of you are aware that we've completed our renovations of the interior space of the sanctuary, and I've been enjoying the new format. I wanted to just kind of keep you abreast of some things that are happening. We are continuing on, really this was the beginning, not the end of the project, continuing on with our work to have the exterior of the building restored, and that's moving along nicely. We'll be choosing our contractor soon and looking towards to start the renovation or the restoration of the exterior envelope later in the spring. And we'll also want to make you aware that we've been able to launch our campaign, our capital campaign website, and you'll see the link at the bottom of the screen. But I would encourage you to have a look there and keep you abreast of just things that are happening and news related to the building project. The other thing that we want to make you aware of is two things that are happening between now and Christmas Eve. And first of all, Christmas Eve, there'll be 2 in-person services here at the church, and plus an online service that you can access at any point during the day. But the services, the 2 in-person services, are filling up fast, so we want to ask you to, if you're planning to come, to make sure that you go online and sign up. We anticipate they'll be full, and so just want to make sure that everybody who wants to come can come, and so we want to ask you to sign up online for that. The other thing that's happening, you may be aware, but the weekend before Christmas, which would be next weekend, we'll be working with Playful Fox Productions, doing a radio version of A Christmas Carol here at the church, and there'll be 3 performances, Friday night, the 18th, and then Saturday afternoon and Saturday evening, the 19th. And again, you can look at the link at the bottom of the screen to purchase tickets and come. It'll be a fun night, and most of you are very familiar with the Dickens Christmas Carol story, and I think you'll find it really entertaining to join us for that next weekend. So I'm gonna pass this off now. We're gonna take our next step in lighting of the next Advent candle, and hope you enjoy the rest of the service.
Good morning. Today we light the candle of peace. I am Kristen,
Mark, Cole,
Austin.
As we draw closer to Christmas and the celebrations of Jesus' birth, we take time to remember and give thanks for all that he means to us.
we recognize that in life we face worries, doubts, and uncertainties. We know this past year has not been easy.
God help us to remember that Jesus is our Prince of Peace, the one who gives us all his peace in all circumstances, a peace that passes all understanding.
We ask you, Jesus, to be our peace so that when we face difficulties, doubts, and uncertainties, that we can remember and trust that you are in control.
Merry Christmas.
Angels we have heard on high, sweetly singing o'er the plains, and the mountains in reply, echoing their joyous strain.
welcome. Great that you are joining us again this week. If this is your very first time, great that you're jumping on. Maybe you're just kind of scrolling through and you found us, or maybe someone shared this with you. Either way, great to have you with us. My name is Joel. I am one of the pastors here at Paris Presbyterian Church. And one of the commitments that we have as a church is wanting to continue to engage with people, whether it's in person or online. And so we are so grateful that you're with us here this week. As we kind of jump in, or actually before we jump in, I want to talk about something for next week. I'm deeming next week as Christmas festive week. What does that mean? All right, it means basically I need you to bust out your most Christmas festive wear. Could be a sweater, some may say festive, some may say ugly. It could be necklaces, it could be earrings, it could be bright lights. I don't know, whatever it is. This is what I'm asking you to do. One of the things that we love to be able to do is to kind of connect with different people and to show different people's faces. And so if you can send me a picture of you, your family, whoever you normally watch with in your most Christmas festive wear, send it to me. Emails at the bottom of the screen. We're going to share that next week. And then if you want, you can actually bust out your festive wear whenever you are watching this. I'm going to be telling those showing up in person to wear their most festive wear next week as well. So I'm going to bust out mine. It's kind of the one Sunday I'm actually kind of allowed to wear this one sweater. I think it's awesome. Some say it's ugly. You can see, you can watch, you can be the judge of that. This week, as we kind of get rolling, I want to play a bit of a game with you. And real simple, it's called Name the Opposite. So I'm going to say one word, and then you're going to blurt out the first word that comes to mind, the opposite of what I said. Don't overthink it. It's like speed round. And if you're watching with other people, you may give different answers. If you're watching by yourself, still say it along. Now, I can't see you. I can't know if you're doing this. I'm going to assume you're playing along. Come on, people. Humor me a little bit here. So, ready? Speed round. Name the opposite. First word, left. Yeah, I'm sure you got right. It shouldn't take that much time. All right, next word, cold. Yeah, okay, still with me here? I know it's pretty easy right now. Fast. Okay, yep, we're good. Okay, this one's getting a little more complicated now. Santa. That might have sparked a few differences, right? Like, what's the opposite of Santa? Scrooge, Grinch, I don't know. Anyways, okay, last one. Peace. I bet on this one, there was a similar theme, but perhaps described in different ways. When I think of the opposite of peace, we can think of war, we can think of conflict, we can think of disruption, we can think of worry, we can think of stress, we can think of noise. We can think of that idea of being unsettled. Peace is that sense of calm, that sense of not being worried or not being in conflict, not being in a sense of disruption. Peace is, I think, one of those realities that we understand what it is. It's just sometimes hard to live out. It seems kind of elusive, doesn't it? Particularly in seasons such as this. In the midst of all that has been going on in life with COVID and everything else, peace is not probably one of those words that we would immediately jump to. It's a sense of being unsettled. It's a sense of still trying to wonder and figure out, when is this going to end? How is this going to end? Are things going to go back to what I would like to have? And then as we start to roll it through our mind over and over and over again, guess what? We don't have any more peace. We actually have less peace in our lives. But peace is something we want. But I know it's oftentimes something we can struggle with. It can be so simple of just wanting peace in some of the small things. Like, have you ever been around like really noisy people or irritating people, and you think, if I could just have a moment of peace, give me peace of mind. And you may have it for a moment and then it's lost. Or then we think of peace in bigger things, in the bigger realities of this world. Maybe you're struggling in a relationship and you just wish there would be more peace. Maybe you're struggling with waiting on the results for your health, results to come back, and you would just like that peace of mind to know that everything is going to be okay. Maybe you need some peace financially. You've lost a job. You're struggling, and the sense of stress is just continuing to grow and grow and grow. There's so many things that we struggle with in life, that we want peace, but how do we get it? What is our response? Oftentimes we respond by thinking, okay, if I can just solve the problem, if whatever is bringing a lack of peace into my life, if I can just eliminate it, if I can just remove it, if I can just sort it, then I will have peace. And that may work, but it's oftentimes temporary, isn't it? That you solve one problem and then another problem begins to creep in, and you're back to square one, again, not living with a sense of peace. Or the bigger problem is, what if the challenge in your life is actually not something that you can sort on your own? And so if you can't solve it, then oftentimes what we resort to next to experience a sense of peace is what I refer to as coping mechanisms. This idea of, well, if I can't deal with the problem, if I can't sort the issue, then I'm just going to sort of learn how to live with it. So I'm going to try to get better sleep. I'm going to eat better. I'm going to exercise more. I'm going to do different things to help me deal with it. But how helpful is that? I recognize that there's value in doing those things, but if you're continually living with that same reality and not experiencing the greatness of peace, then what do we do? To push a little bit further, when it comes to faith, when it comes to God, what does that have to say? Is there a response? I mean, oftentimes our response may be, well, faith is all about, I'm just going to give my problem to God, and then if he solves the problem for me, then I can have peace. And that's kind of where faith begins and faith ends when it comes to the problems and the challenges of life. But I think there's something more, something greater, a subtlety that can begin to be easily missed, but can start to become an incredible reality in our life. Last week, we started a series called Christmas is Different, Yet We Still Look for Hope. And if you joined us, we talked about a theme verse, the words that the angels first gave to the shepherds that will hopefully begin to ring true for us. And it was the announcement of the birth of Jesus. That was good news that will bring great joy for all people. So this week, I want to look at, how does the birth of Jesus, how does the reality of Jesus bring good news by providing us a greater sense of peace? Well, I want to jump back in time a little bit. Actually, more than a little bit. 700 years before the first Christmas, the birth of Jesus. And we're going to jump into a time where God was primarily speaking to his people through prophets. That prophets would oftentimes not only speak about what was going to happen, but remind them that God was with them, even in the midst of those moments that didn't bring peace. And the prophet we want to particularly look at is the prophet Micah. Now, Micah lived at a time where things were starting to go downhill for the nation of Israel. They were still rolling along as their own nation, but signs of trouble were in the not too distant future. That in a matter of time, they would eventually be conquered by another nation. Their homes would be destroyed, the temple would be knocked down, and majority of them would be actually taken out into exile. And so God sends the prophet Micah to remind them of his presence, but also to provide them with an incredible promise that begins to highlight the greater reality that was yet to come in Jesus. And so let's jump into the words of Micah. and begin to understand how even though these words were spoken almost 2,700 years ago, they can begin to provide us with a better understanding of how faith in God can begin to provide an incredible sense of peace in the midst of whatever you are facing today. So return to Micah chapter 5, verse 2. And we read this. But you, O Bethlehem, are only a small village among all the people of Judah. Yet a ruler of Israel, whose origins are in the distant past, will come for you on my behalf. The people of Israel will be abandoned to their enemies until the woman in labor gives birth. Then at last his fellow countrymen will return from exile to their own land, and he will stand to lead his flock with the Lord's strength, in the majesty of the name of the Lord his God. Then his people will live there undisturbed, for he will be highly honored around the world, and he will be their source of peace. It's right in that passage that first of all, we begin to understand the context in Micah's day. Was that God was speaking to them and reminding them that actually things were going to get worse before they got better. But that the challenges they were about to face was not evidence that God had walked away on them, or that God had abandoned them, or that God was not at work in them. The prophet Micah was speaking of this time where this ruler would rise up and shepherd God's people. In the context of Micah's day, that was significant because one of the primary reasons that the nation of Israel had gotten into so much problem was their leadership was downright awful. They had failed to follow in the ways of God, and as a result, the entire nation suffered. And it's here in these words of Micah that not only the people of God were given a sense of hope and of promise and of certainty, but is also beginning to point to something far greater that was yet to happen. The birth of Jesus, the birth of the Messiah. But there was one thing that was said that I believe begins to open the door to us understanding how faith in Jesus can begin to become good news of great joy as it starts to reveal to us the reality of what ultimate true peace can be. It comes in the final words that I read, when it says, "And he will stand and lead his flock with the Lord's strength, and he will be the source of peace." That's a place I want to land today. This understanding that when it comes to faith in Jesus, the peace that he offers is different than often the peace that we desire to attain. You see, oftentimes we link peace to the external. That when the external challenges or the difficulties are removed, then we can have peace. And so this internal sense of peace and not being stressed or worried or disturbed or distraught is linked to the external. And so we begin to land in the place that as long as the external isn't sorted, as long as the situation remains difficult, then I cannot experience a sense of peace. And so we almost handcuff our faith by thinking that if God doesn't sort out my circumstances or my situation, then I guess I can never experience this greater sense of peace. But that's not what the prophet is talking about. That's ultimately not what Jesus offers us. I want to turn to a second place, and these are the words of Jesus in John chapter 14, verses 27. Now again, understand the context, right? Always understand what is going on. It's the night when Jesus is about to be arrested, betrayed, disowned, and the following day crucified. So if there was ever a night where peace would not likely be on the topic of conversation, that would be the night. But listen to what Jesus says. He says, I am leaving you with a gift, peace of mind and heart. And the peace I give is a gift the world cannot give. It's in those very words that we begin to see how Jesus differentiates between the peace that he offers and the peace that so often we pursue or chase. His peace is different. His peace doesn't come from the external circumstances being sorted, but rather from the inner reality of how he is with us in the midst of all things. I think oftentimes we stumble in faith because we begin to equate what is happening to me as evidence for or against whether or not God is with me. But that's not the promise. That's not the message that God gives to us. Back to the words of Micah the prophet, reminds us that Jesus is our source of peace. That peace comes in knowing that God is with us. That is ultimately one of the great messages of Christmas. The reality of God with us in the midst of all things. This was a promise that not only Jesus spoke about, but the early church began to cling to as well. Jump to a final passage here today. It actually comes in the book of Philippians. And this is written by one of the earlier followers of Jesus, a guy by the name of Paul. And Paul understood what it meant to go through difficulties. And if anyone would not have peace in his life, it would be Paul in that moment. You see, he's at the end of his life. He had been arrested, he had been put in prison, and he is now awaiting trial. And listen to these words that he speaks to the early church, but he also speaks to you and to me. Philippians 4, beginning in verse 6. He says, don't worry about anything. Instead, pray about everything. Tell God what you need and thank him for all he has done. Then you will experience God's peace, which exceeds anything you can understand. His peace will guard your hearts and your minds as you live in Christ Jesus. What I appreciate about what Paul is telling us is reminding us again that our peace in Jesus doesn't come from having all of our circumstances or our situations sorted, but in knowing the presence of God in the midst of whatever we are facing. I think too often, too many people, and maybe this has happened in your life, have actually walked away from God too soon. That you have not waited to see the presence of God at work in your life. Beginning to allow Jesus to be the source of your peace. Not the absence of conflict, not the absence of difficulty, but rather his presence being with you. And so maybe you're on that edge right now. Maybe you're sitting in a place and thinking, Joel, you don't understand what I'm dealing with or who I'm dealing with. And that's probably true. But have you given the opportunity over to God? I believe that when we begin to experience the presence of God, we can begin to experience his peace in the midst of all things. A peace that's so often described as passes all understanding. So what does that look like? Let me suggest two things as I look to the words that we read by the Apostle Paul. The first thing he says is simply take your concerns, take your worries to God. Bring them to him. But what I find so often is it's helpful for me when I don't begin to editorialize or I don't begin to tell God what I think he should do. Just simply state openly and bluntly what it is that is not allowing peace to enter into your life. Because then Paul says something will happen. The peace of Christ, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your heart and your mind in Christ Jesus. This is where it gets interesting, because how does that begin to happen? Do we only experience the peace of God when all of our problems are taken away? No, I think it's actually found when we begin to actually stop talking and begin to listen. One of the most challenging disciplines in my life is actually to sit in silence and allow God to speak into my life. Speak into the circumstance and the situation of what I am going through. So how do we begin to experience the peace of Jesus? Share what is going on, and then begin to sit in silence. A minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes, just allow God to speak into your life. One of the passages I always go back to when I attempt this in my life is Psalm 46, verse 10, that says, "Be still and know that I am God." There is tremendous power in those words. What I've come to realize in my own life is that oftentimes those moments where I experience the tremendous peace of Jesus doesn't come when all the problems are sorted, but often comes in those moments where the difficulties seem the greatest. And I'm at the point of not only bending, but almost ready to break. And I experience the peace of Christ at work. As I was thinking about what I would share with you this week, a number of examples from my life began to come back into memory. And I think one of the most profound moments where I experienced the peace of Christ was over a decade ago. Rebecca and I were living in Malawi, and we'd been there a very short time. And within our first year, we experienced many challenges. But one of the great joys was when we found out that she was pregnant. And not long after that, we were planning a trip to go to Zimbabwe, a neighboring country. And with this great news, this wonderful joy, we headed off into Zimbabwe. And it wasn't long that we were there that things began to not go right. Rebecca began experiencing severe cramping and pain that simply could not be ignored. Not knowing really what to do, we went to the closest medical clinic to get her checked out and hopefully getting the news that things would be okay. I still remember the doctor coming out and having this look of seriousness on his face, telling us to go to the local hospital immediately so that Rebecca could have emergency surgery. The pregnancy was ectopic. And not only was now the risk of losing the unborn baby, but if not dealt with immediately, Rebecca could begin bleeding out. Our minds were spinning. We were in a foreign country. We couldn't get in touch with our families. We couldn't even really figure out what was happening. And in the span of less than a day, Rebecca was being wheeled into the operating room. I can still remember that moment where I saw her go into the room, not knowing what would happen next. The surgery was going to take a number of hours. And so I went and started to walk the streets of Bulawayo. If anyone knows me, you know I can't sit still at the best of times. So when my mind is racing, I got to be moving. And I remember walking the streets of Bulawayo. And I remember literally crying out to God. And it's in that moment that I began to understand this peace that passes all understanding. Because it was in that moment of me not knowing what to say next, of not knowing how I'd respond, I remember experiencing the presence of God with a sense of peace of knowing that no matter what was about to happen, that He was with us, that God was in the midst of it all. And I remember this overwhelming sense of peace that wasn't based upon thinking everything was going to be okay, that everything would go according to plan, but that God was walking with us. Rebecca came out of surgery. The child was lost. Rebecca spent months recovering, unable to work, in significant pain. But it was one of those moments where I was reminded again of the incredible reality when we begin to allow Jesus to become our source of peace. I can't say that I know what you're going through. I don't want to be dismissive or flippant. But I do know this. If you allow God to be a part of your life, a part of your conflict, a part of your pain, a part of whatever you are going through, He gives us that promise of His peace that surpasses all understanding. A peace that comes even in the most difficult moments of life. And oftentimes it begins when we are still and we remember that God is with us. This Christmas, perhaps the greatest gift that you will receive is not in having your problems or difficulties go away, but in being reminded of the peace that comes in Jesus, that guards our hearts and our minds in Him. Just as we conclude, let me pray with you. And if there's something specific that is preventing peace in your life, I'm just going to encourage you to bring that to God today. One of the postures we often take in prayer is by just simply having our hands open, just releasing it to Him. So let us pray together. Lord Jesus, I thank You for the reminder that You are the Prince of Peace. You are the one who brings peace into this world. I pray for those that are watching this on a laptop, on a TV, on a phone, that in the midst of whatever they are going through, that they would know your peace, that you'd remind them of your great presence. Jesus, I am thankful for your peace, a peace that passes all understanding. And I pray your peace would be a reality that we experience in the midst of all of life. For we ask it, Jesus, in your name. Amen.
You are here, moving in our midst. I worship you, I worship you. You are here, working in this place. I worship you, I worship you. You are waymaker, miracle worker, promise keep, light in the darkness. My God, that is who you are. Waymaker, miracle worker, promise keep, light in the darkness. My God, that is who you are. You are here, touching every heart. I worship you, I worship you. You are here, healing every heart. I worship you, I worship you. You are here, turning lives around. I worship never stop working. You never stop working. Even when I don't see it, you're working. Even when I don't feel it, you're working. You never stop working. You never stop working. Even when I don't see it, you're working. Even when I don't feel it, you're working. You never stop